Hi folks, well today is the day to work on firewood. So as I promised previously, what I would do is give a brief video on chainsaw safety. So I'll start this series on gathering firewood by talking about that a bit. I think I've told you before that I prefer Stihl brand chainsaws. They've been very reliable and durable for me. And you have three options if you're looking to buy a chainsaw with Stihl. They have a very light duty homeowner series of models for, say, somebody who just occasionally has to cut a branch or so on down, you know, some trimming in the yard. They hold up well for that. Then they have a medium duty saw, which is what these are. Essentially they're labeled as like farm and ranch. Somebody who's going to use the saw fairly regularly, but not necessarily daily. And then they have a more heavy duty, a professional line of saws for somebody who makes a living cutting timber. You know, either like a tree surgeon or a logger, and they have a whole series of different types of saws with different applications at that level. So I don't need that. I have the medium quality or the medium duty saws here. These both are considered the Stihl Farm Boss model. This is an older one, an MS290, and this one is a newer version. They changed the number on it, but it's still basically got the same power as the other one. This is an MS271. This one has an 18-inch bar, and this one has a 16-inch bar. Both models are rated for anywhere from a 16 to a 20-inch bar as far as the power being able to cut without it bogging down too much. Let me just go through briefly some of the components of the saws, just if you're new to this, so that it gives you an idea what you're looking at. This is your main handle that you hold the saw, and here is your back handle that you hold, and also the safety catch and trigger to add speed to the saw blade. What would you call it? The accelerator or whatever. I'm not sure, but basically that's the trigger to run the saw. On the back here, you've got different settings for starting. To initially start the saw when it's cold, you want to lock on the trigger, hold your trigger with your hand, and then push this all the way down to the bottom, and it will start from there. And then after that's full choke, and then after it's running, you kick it up a notch, and then it will run without any kind of extra enriched fuel supply. It'll be more efficient. So that's basically how it works. And then that turns it off. You just push it all the way up, and it'll kill the saw. These are pull starts. You do have to be careful because there's a fair amount of compression. So sometimes you go to pull and it will pull you back a little bit. I imagine there probably are some saws that have electric starts. Obviously an electric saw would, or a battery powered saw would, but these are gas powered. They have a lot more torque than anything with a battery that plugs in, so that's why you have to start them this way. Now, one feature that's been on all saws for a number of decades now is this bar here. This is known as a chain brake. Now, you normally, when you're using a saw, have it in the upright position here, just like you see. But if I push forward on this, you can hear it click. What that does is that will instantly stop the rotation of the chain in a microsecond. It's a safety feature because the idea is if you're cutting, and you'd have this hand on, and the saw kicks back towards you, your hand would push the chain brake on before the blade here. I'll take this guard off so you can see better. Before the blade could kick back and cut you. So this is a good safety feature. They recommend that when you're starting the saw, you keep the chain brake on too, so that you don't accidentally, when you're trying to pull start it, you don't accidentally cut yourself should it engage, fire up, and then the blade starts spinning. So if you're new to that, that's a good idea too. But when you're cutting, of course, you don't want it on. And again, even though this saw is older, it also has, it works the same way. You can see here. There, it's on, and now it's off for operation. So you always have to use a chainsaw, shall we say, right-handed. Even though I'm left-handed, there are a couple saws I can't use left-handed. One would be a circular saw because the way that's set up, and also a chainsaw. That's because you must have your left hand on the upper bar and your right hand on the trigger and the rear handle to balance and control the saw well. Also, it's designed because the blade, the chain and the bar are on the right hand side. If it should kick back, it would tend to come past your body then, because you're holding it more on the right side of your body when you're cutting. If you tried to hold it the opposite way, with your left hand and then your right hand on here, you'd be working across your body, and if it should kick back, you're more likely to get hit with the spinning blade. So that's why you always have to use the saw right-handed. Left hand on the handle, right hand on the rear handle with the trigger. Okay, so that's just some basic safety stuff. I'm talking about kicking back. This is a common problem with chainsaws. It's just part of how they're designed. Sometimes when you go to bite into the wood, you'll hit something that will cause it to want to push back out of the wood towards you. And from the motion of the saw cutting, as it's going this way, it would tend to come back at you. That's why you always have to have a firm grip with your top hand. That way you don't have to worry so much about it coming back and hurting you. Another common sense safety feature that you would probably think of on your own is you always keep the blade away from you. You want to work in front of you. You don't want it down close to your legs or your feet. You always want to keep your body behind, say, this plane on the saw, the handle on the saw. You always want the blade, I keep calling it blade, but it's the chain and the bar. You always want that out away from your body. That way you can't get hurt because it's away from your body. So that's a common sense thing. If you're new to chainsaws too, they make actually a less aggressive cutting chain, an anti-kickback chain. It doesn't cut as much wood with each pass of the rotation, the RPMs of the saw, the chain spinning, but it will also not kick back as easily. So if you're a more experienced cutter, sawyer, I guess would be the official term, you want a more aggressive, a sharper type of chain with, maybe bigger teeth or sharper teeth on, so that it will cut more wood with each pass and makes your job easier. But there's also more risk, of course, for kickback. So if you're new to this, you might want an anti-kickback chain just to get used to the saw, and also gives you another level of protection. It's not that it can't, but it's less likely to with the anti-kickback chain because it's not as aggressive in the amount that it's cutting each pass. So that's something to keep in mind as well. You always want to make sure that your chain is good and snug. If you look right here, there's no give in this. I won't take the time to show that now. Maybe at some future date when I'm doing maintenance on the saws I will. But there's a way to adjust the tension on this chain as it passes around the bar. You don't want it to be loose and floppy. You want it to be good and snug so that there is no excess play. And also, of course, you want to make sure that these are the cutting edges, the front part here of each of the teeth. And of course, you want them to be good and sharp. And maybe someday I'll do a video on showing how you sharpen them too, because I have both the hand file and a sharpening grinder. So But you want good sharp blades, obviously, because it's like trying to cut steak with a butter knife. Otherwise, you want a good sharp knife when you're trying to cut steak, so you want a good sharp chain when you're trying to cut through wood. So just keep that in mind too. And there are different brands out there. I mean, you can buy the if you have a steel saw, you can buy steel blades, or you can buy other brands. There are a number of ones. I've used Oregon blades. They're good too. Or I keep calling them blades. I'm sorry, chains. And they're good too. And there could be some others out there. You just want something that's going to fit your saw and going to fit your lifestyle and how you cut. Something that will not force you to work harder than you have to, but nothing that's going to put your body in peril if it's too aggressive for you to handle. Excuse me. Now, let me just show you briefly here the gas and oil fill reservoirs. A couple things to remember. Let's start first with our fuel. These engines are 2-cycle engines, not 4-cycle engines, which means there is no oil reserve like you have in a car or a lawnmower, etc. It's like a weed whacker. So you have to have a mix of gas and 2-cycle motor oil that gets mixed in with it. I believe that the ratio of steel is 50 to 1, 50 parts fuel per 1 part oil, and that keeps the parts in the engine lubricated enough that it won't burn out. But you have to do that mix, and you put that into the gas tank when you want to run. You can get the 2-cycle oil in small containers that will give you your ratios. Like let's say you're going 50 to 1 and you want to put a gallon in your gas can. You can get a little can or little jar container of 2-cycle motor oil, and all you have to do is dump that into your gas can, put in your gallon of gas, and then you have the right mixture. You don't have to go by guessing. But there is a formula that you can use to figure out how many ounces per gallon of gas, etc. So, but these steel caps here are very well designed. The older ones weren't so good, and you'll see most people with older steel saws, they've had to replace them to some extent. These are easy on and off. All that you do here is you take and flip up that and then give it a quick quarter turn, and that's it. That's all it takes to expose your fuel tank. So, and then you want to put it back on, make sure it's secure. You don't want fuel leaking anywhere, and then lock that down. Now, what about oil? If I said that you're putting, your 2-cycle motor oil in with your gas, well, why is there an oil reserve? That's a good question, and the answer is very simple. It's for the chain, to lubricate the chain. This is the reserve for the chain and bar oil, and that's what you need to use. It's called chain and bar oil. You can buy it wherever there are other accessories in home improvement stores, hardware stores, etc. But it's called chain and bar oil. And again, it's got a reservoir just like the other one, tank, and you just fill it with that. You check it every time you check your gas. You add to it when you fill it. You want it to be full, just like when your gas oil mixture reserve is full too, reservoir is full too. So what this does is it puts oil onto the chain when you're cutting. It's an automatic chain oiling process that steel has, so that this doesn't burn the chain out. The blade or the bar would get too hot if you didn't have some lubrication on this, because the RPMs are going, I don't remember what the specs are on that, but you're talking several hundred RPMs. So you want to make sure that it's lubricated so that you don't have excessive wear or that it overheats on you. So that's why you have to keep the chain and bar oil in here. And just a quick pro tip in that regard. If you're cutting in the summertime, the chain and bar oil will flow nicely, almost like motor oil. If you're cutting in the dead of winter and it's cold, your chain and bar oil is going to be like molasses. It doesn't matter, it still works. There's nothing wrong with that, but I just want you to know that in the colder weather, the chain and bar oil does tend to thicken up and makes it more difficult to work with, but nothing serious. But And so another feature that, at least in the older saws, is that you have a filter, an air filter here. As you can see, this one I've got to clean. It's very dirty, so I haven't used this saw in a while, but you can see all this needs to come off of there. It's like a cloth and plastic mesh filter to keep the sawdust and the other dirt and grime out of the engine, but to draw the air in for the carburation. You can see right behind here, here's where the spark plug is. If should you have to do maintenance on that, you'll have to check your manual to see what kind of plug you need to replace it with. But that's just some of the other maintenance that you do when you have a saw. Shouldn't put that back on because I got to clean that anyhow. Also, there are adjustment holes here to control the carburation and also the idle speed. You don't, when your chainsaw is running, when the engine is running, but you haven't squeezed the trigger, the chain should not be spinning. It should be just perfectly still. And that's a safety feature, because you don't turn your saw off every time you stop cutting. You might move from one piece to another, etc. But you don't want the blade spinning while you're not cutting, because that's dangerous. So if it is set properly, if these adjustments are set properly, the chain will not be spinning when it's idling, when the engine is at idle speed. And if you have a problem with that, then you'll have to adjust it or take it to a dealer and have them adjust it for you. Again, that's a safety feature. Look, these saws can be extremely dangerous if they're not handled properly. These blades are sharp, they're spinning very fast, and it will take your leg right off if you catch it right. Or it could kill you if you get hit with it in the wrong way. I mean, there have been lots and lots of those kind of accidents. People have lost body parts. So you do have to be careful, but with common sense safety, and you take control of your saw, you're not using a saw more aggressive or larger than you can handle, you can operate it safely. You know, you keep it in front of you, you keep a good grip on with both hands, you keep when you're working in the woods or even in the yard, you want to make sure that, I'm just showing here, just that your feet are on level ground and you have good balance. You don't want to be working off balance that you could fall over. Just a couple other things like that are practical, and if you do that, then you won't be injured. So that's the important thing, and you respect the saw. It's not a toy. It's not simply a cordless drill. It's not simply a little jigsaw. This is a major, powerful tool that can do a lot of work and process a lot of wood for you, but you have to treat it with respect, or you could suffer the consequences. So I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I'm just saying follow those simple guidelines that I've mentioned, and you should be okay. Now, I usually also wear a pair of heavy gloves when I'm doing this. It gives some protection from the vibration on the hands, but also I can get a better grip perhaps in different weather conditions. You just want to make sure you can get a good grip. You don't want something your hands are going to be slipping around on. The other thing that's absolutely necessary with the chainsaw is head, eye, and ear protection. Fortunately, Stihl and other companies make this all in one helmet. The heavy-duty plastic has a halo frame that fits to your head. You can adjust it right here. And the plastic is heavy duty enough that should you get hit by branches falling off of a tree, you'll be all right. I mean, smaller ones, nothing large, of course. If you remember the old pictures of the lumberjacks, they actually had steel helmets that they wore to try to protect them from getting hit and damaged. But for most of us, we don't need to worry about that. They have the built-in earphones. Those are absolutely necessary when this thing is, either of these, or any chainsaw for that matter, is running at full RPM. It's loud, and it can, over time, damage your hearing, which you don't want. So you want to have the ear protection. You also want to protect your face from debris, flying chips, etc., things that could get in your eyes. I prefer just the mesh screen one here. You can get them with plastic, clear plastic screens or shields as well. I don't care for those as much because in time they do scratch and it cuts down on your vision, and also if you're working when it's warm, they could fog up on you, whereas this won't. Now this won't stop the real minute sawdust from coming through. If it's windy and there's very minute sawdust, it won't stop that. But it deals with most of what I have to deal with. I use this also for my string trimmer too, and that protects me from the flying debris from that. It does the trick, and that's all I'm concerned about. The other thing too is if you're out in the woods with this screen down, it also protects your eyes from branches. If you're working around smaller saplings when you're cutting or what have you, accidentally poke yourself with one, or it could scratch you in the face or poke you in the eye. That gives you a level of protection from that. So I definitely recommend that type of a system when you're using your chainsaw. You don't need to buy a steel brand. I did because I liked it. Well, actually my youngest son gave it to me for a birthday present one year, so that's why I have that. You can get a generic brand that aren't quite maybe as good a quality, but would do the job if you're only an occasional user, other places online. So, but I definitely recommend that for any kind of string trimming work or chainsaw work. So that's another safety feature that you want. I shouldn't have to say this, but in the world today when there's no common sense, you never ever want to use a chainsaw without having some kind of heavy boots on. You don't want to go out in sneakers. You certainly don't want to go out in bare feet or flip-flops. That's just asking for problems. You don't want to wear shorts. You want to have heavy pants on. You can even buy leather chaps, or I think maybe they're even Kevlar, I'm not sure. You can get a pair of chaps to put over your legs too to protect you from actually getting cut by the saw blades. And probably the best thing to do would be to get steel-toed work boots if you're going to do a lot of work. I don't because they're just extra weight that I don't need in the woods. But I try to be careful to keep the saw away from my legs and feet. But those are good safety tips too, that if you want to protect yourself and you're new at doing this, an investment of some of that kind of equipment is probably a good thing. But please do not do this in bare feet or with light sneakers or flip-flops or sandals or something. You just don't ever want to do anything that dumb when you're using power equipment. So just keep that in mind. All right, probably the next application in this video will be, you'll see me in the woods and I'll start up the saw and start cutting. I have a couple trees that are down that I want to section up today, and if I get to it, maybe there's a large shagbark hickory that's dead that I need to actually cut down. So we'll see how it goes, and thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel.